Hello, this video is all about Node.js. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to explain what Node.js is and describe its core features. So what is Node.js? Well, JavaScript used to only be available within browsers. You used to only be able to access JavaScript within things like Google, Chrome, or Safari, as long as they date back. In 2009, developers were finally given the choice to use Node or JavaScript outside of the browser. Now, developers can use JavaScript to write software that used to only be possible with languages like C++, Java, Python, Ruby, C#, and many others. We are going to be using Node in the context of building web servers. So just like you can do that, build web servers with all the languages that were previously mentioned, you can do the same now with JavaScript. We're going to be using this really cool format called JavaScript Object Notation, or JSON, to send information back and forth between applications. So what are some advantages of using Node? So one of the best advantages is you get JavaScript on the server. You use the same language and paradigm on the client or React applications and server. So there's no more context switching. That does your brain a very big favor. JavaScript is also single-threaded, so it removes the complexity of managing multiple threads. We also have asynchronicity built into JavaScript, or the engines that power JavaScript. So we can now take full advantage of processor that JavaScript is running on. The Node process runs on a single CPU, which makes things really, really nice. We also get to take advantage of the NPM registry. We have access to the largest ecosystem of useful libraries by the way of NPM modules that you're already used to and you've already been using in React. What are some disadvantages of using Node.js? The first is JavaScript on the server. You lose the ability to use the right tool or language for the job. Now, JavaScript can play nicely with other languages that are around other servers, but if you're using it as a web server, normally you kind of stick with the tool, and it's kind of hard to switch languages, and you kind of lose some of those benefits that you would normally get. So if you use JavaScript on the server, Node.js, normally you're sticking with it, and it might not be the right tool for the right job. Single-threaded, so this is also a disadvantage. It can't take advantage of servers with multiple threads. And then the asynchronicity is actually difficult for learners who don't know JavaScript or people who come from other programming languages that are used to a default synchronous operation or like a blocking I/O. But that's the best part about JavaScript anyway, is that it's a non-blocking I/O, which is really nice. And then the NPM registry actually can provide way too much information. For the untrained user, the NPM registry can be very cumbersome and very large, very daunting. You could choose packages that are ill-maintained or provide and introduce vulnerabilities into your code. And this is something that you want to look out for. So how does one node? Well, it's as simple as going to your terminal and writing node. Once you do that, you'll be given the ability to write in the little node REPL right there in your terminal. So you can actually just type in valid, regular JavaScript, and you can see node take place right there in the terminal. So that's one way you could start using Node. We're actually going to be using Node to execute a script file, a JavaScript file that we put together that's going to build a little web server in just a minute. But I will take you through sort of a little orientation of the using Node in the terminal. So some things to remember about Node is that you have a console versus the window now. So instead of this awesome little window that you get inside of, like, for example, Chrome's DevTools, you actually have what's called the console object. So you're switching from the paradigm of window to console, okay? So you get a chance to learn a little bit about each. Now they're both JavaScript. Window is the window object in JavaScript, and console is the console object within JavaScript. They're both JavaScript, okay? But you don't have things like alert and then a couple of others. So you're gonna have to get used to the things that aren't there in JavaScript that you're used to on the client when you're working with JavaScript that you're not used to yet on the server with Node.js. So we're actually going to take the next steps, and we're gonna actually write out a simple server with Node. This is something that you're not going to be challenged to do very often outside of this particular objective, but it's important that you see the benefits that tools like Express bring to you once you are using those outside of the Node context. So we're going to be using Node's HTTP module to abstract away some complex network related operations. We're going to write a single request handler function that will handle all the requests on the server. Now this handler function will actually take the request coming from the client and produce a response back to the client. Also, the request handler takes two arguments, an object representing the request and then one representing the response. So let's do it. Go ahead and open up your terminal and meet me over there, and be sure that you have things like VS Code, iTerm, or terminal installed. I use a terminal command application called Hyper, which is something that I cannot recommend more. So go ahead and get those things installed or ready, and we'll jump right in together. I'm sure you have them already, but in case you didn't have VS Code or something at this point, you should. Okay, now that you have your terminal up and running, let's go ahead and get started building our very first Node.js program. Now, if you want to, this particular tutorial is found right there in your training kit. So you could potentially pause the video, head over there, kind of type it out and follow the instructions there. Or if you want to stick with me, you can do the same. But this is a code-along exercise, so make sure that you have your terminal ready, your VS Code ready, and everything's good to go. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a file on our root. You know that we're at the root when you see this tilde. Before we do that, we're actually going to take a little tour of Node.js. So go ahead and just type in Node, and notice that you have a little caret. This is a REPL, just like you would be able to write in Replit or any online editor. You can now type in valid JavaScript. So I can say const name equals Ryan, and then I can invoke and find that name, not invoke it, but request that value from name, and it gives me back Ryan. You could do simple mathematical operations like 123 minus 20 should bring us back 103. So JavaScript right there in the terminal. So if anyone ever asks you, what is Node.js? You will be able to say, think about that for just a second. That's right, JavaScript outside of the browser. JavaScript in another environment that is non-browser. Node.js is simply just JavaScript without the browser. To exit the Node REPL, you just hit Control-C, then hit it again, and you're back to your root, back to go. So now go ahead and touch index.js, and let's go ahead and open index.js. Now, if you don't have this code command installed, now is a really good time to do it. What it's going to allow you to do is just type that command code and open up any directory or file that you'd like to in VS Code. The way that you want to install it is just open up your little command palette. I use in Mac Command-Shift-P, and then I like to find, or then you can just type in code, and notice it's this little shell command install code command path. You can go ahead and click on that, and it'll install it, and you'll be able to open up files, directories, right there from your command line in VS Code, which is really, really nice. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to build our server. What is a server? That's a question that I want us to answer right now. So a server is basically a computer that is it's a place in a computer that is listening for traffic, and when it receives that traffic, it basically knows what to do with that traffic. So every single time that you go to www.google.com, you are asking the servers that host Google to give you back some sort of website. And then you're able to use that website by entering stuff into the input box. Same thing with Facebook.com. You say, hey, internet, go find at this address this software and give it back to me. Now, that's a high-level interpretation of what a server actually is. That's exactly what we're going to build today. We're going to build a place that can essentially be propped up and be ready to receive communication. We're not going to communicate with the server quite yet, but what we're going to do is we're going to set it up so that if we wanted to communicate with it, we would be able to. So the first thing we need is a module from the Node language from JavaScript called HTTP. So you can just label it HTTP and require HTTP. And that comes straight from Node.js. Now, this require syntax is pretty much the same exact thing as import foo from bar that you've been used to with React. It's just the antiquated way that we used to do module imports and exports. Okay, so for you to understand this, Node, there are versions of Node that are compatible with the new ES6 modules or import-export syntax, and then there are versions of Node that are not. To be safe, we're just going to make sure we use the require syntax, which the concepts traverse, import, export, pretty much the same as require. Okay, and we'll go over that ad nauseum over the next couple days. For us to build this server, we need to have a place or the computer where the server is going to run. So we're going to say const hostname is going to be equal to the string of 127.0.0.1. That's just saying this computer. And then a port, some port where we can communicate with this traffic. So I'm just going to do 3000 to keep it consistent with the training kit. Now we're going to define our server. It's going to be a function that is set equal to http.createServer that is going to take our request handler callback. So we have these two unique arguments called rec and res. Luis will call these the homies. You'll understand all about the homies later this week. But just know that they are the request object that could potentially come up to the server and the response object as well that sends a response back to wherever this resource was requested. Notice that I had a typo there. I just went ahead and fixed that to HTTP. So now we need to set this up. We need to create our server. We're going to send sort of a status code back to the client. So we're going to say res.statuscode equals 200. We're going to say res.setHeader, and we're going to define the content type here. And we're going to say that that's going to be a content type of JSON. Or actually, this one we'll just do text plain. You could say JSON if you wanted to. And then we're going to terminate our process by saying res.end. And we're going to terminate it with this awesome hello world from Node.js. Okay? Now we just need to listen for that traffic. We're going to give it the port. We're going to give it a host name and a simple callback function that will allow us to execute within the context of this listen function and say console.log server listening on, and then this is where we're going to say http:/// and we're going to get nice and easy here and just say hostname : port. All right. For notes, comments on what this code is doing, refer to the training kit. So now we're actually going to navigate in our terminal, and we're going to just execute this file using Node. So if I wanted to just execute a simple file, all I would have to do is just say node index.js. And notice that our server is listening, and we're kind of hung up here. I can't just go typing stuff. I mean, I could, but it's not bash anymore. It's just waiting for my command, right? Waiting for traffic. So we've propped up this file to be listening. So now what we're going to do is do something really, really cool. We're actually going to communicate with this server. We're going to open up a Chrome browser, and we're going to navigate to localhost 3000 and check it out. Node just spoke back to us. So let's recap what we just did here. We built a file called index.js. We wrote a script on that file that basically creates a server and props that server up on a host of 127.0.0.1 and port of 3000, and then sends back some sort of response to whatever resource is requesting it. In our case, we went to Chrome and requested that resource, and it gave us back a response. So we are literally building computers so that computers can talk to one another. So that is your first Hello World introduction to Node.js. Now your challenge is to write a paragraph about what Node.js is. Explain at least 3 of its core features and submit that paragraph to your project manager. Thank you so much for tuning in.